Welcome back, MTG Joe here, dying of allergies, so apologize for my voice, but we are going to cover the best deck options for the upcoming Standard Metagame Challenge this weekend. So it will be best of 3 Standard. You get to pay 2,000 entry, gold, and then each win you get progressively gets you more gold and more packs. 7 wins gets you 30 packs of usually the latest set that I would imagine. But some collection of cards packs. So it's a good way to kind of farm, especially if you can keep like slightly above 50% win rate. I usually have a lot of fun with these events. They're a good way to kind of test out brews, gather a whole lot of data, see what's working, and just have kind of a mini tournament-esque thing that you can prompt at your own leisure. You don't have to wait like an hour in between rounds. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to cover off at a high level a bunch of different deck options that you can consider for the event. We're going to be looking in part from Untapped GG, what you see on the screen. The companion tool that aggregates user win rates gives us a whole bunch of win rate stats, and then like popularity of the metagame from the users that use it. Link for Untapped's in the video description. You can also track your own win rates. And then we're also going to look at MTG Melee. There's a number of large tournaments, like regional championship qualifiers that took place over the weekend. I think even some were RCs, the European one. But we'll take a look at a couple lists there as well. So starting off, we have popularity of the day. So just kind of seeing where from a snapshot Mythic Rank is. So seeing where like the highest ranked players are kind of playing their games. From there, we'll pivot into the games. I'll timestamp and paste all the deck lists so you can easily import them as well. So popularity of the day, we have Boros Convoke at about 16%. We've had an increase in this deck recently. We can see on the graph here. We've also seen Azorius Control hover around 10%. Esper Midrange at about 10%. Golgari, the Temur Analyst or Temur Control deck, which is like the ramp deck. Domain at about 5. Mono red at 5. Toxic at about 4. So you see like Esper Midrange was at 1.35, has come down quite a bit in terms of play rate. And we see an increase of the Convoke deck. We see an increase, ebb and flow. The control picked up a bit. It's kind of neutralized, like the Bant Toxic deck preys on the control deck. So you kind of have elements like that. So we're going to look at standard 12,000 matches of best of 3 were played in the last week or so at the Mythic Rank. And the highest win rate deck from ladder data is Bant Toxic. So I'm going to show 2 lists. So this one's from the ladder. It's built a little bit different, but it's proving to have won some games. It's a little bit more interactive. So you'll see that this version's only on the 12 creatures. Crawling Chorus, Skrelves, and Venerated Rot Priest. There's no 2-drop in here, the double strike one. You still have Skrelves Hive, but this one's a lot more interactive. And we see a card that hasn't been seen play in this deck. Reasonable Doubt. So it's just like soft counter that you suspect when your creatures, give them unblockable basically, which is really big in this deck because you don't need to get through with chunks of damage. You just need to ping them multiple times. So the 1 damage is all you need to give them toxic damage. This version here, you have Serum Snare as a bounce effect that proliferates, Prolonged Phyrexia, each opponent gets poison counter, draw a card, Experimental Augury to proliferate, Binding is another kind of counter effect. So lots of ways once you get the initial damage just to keep proliferating. Also playing the spree card Getaway Glamour. So a white and a 1, exile target non-token creature you control, return to the battlefield, so just a blink. And destroy target creature if no other creature has greater power. So destroy target creature if no other creature has greater power. So you can get rid of smaller stuff or bigger stuff. So get rid of bigger stuff and then keep that. So it's kind of a protect your spell and blow up something, which isn't bad because like Rot Priest triggers off that. March of Swirlingness as another way to kind of protect. This deck offers a bunch of utility lands and Myrex and Seed Core as well. Sideboard, just more counters, enter the battlefield style effects. Get Lost as big removal, Glass Casket as smaller removal. Bloated Contaminator, if they use like temporary lockdowns, you have the Contaminator. You also have Vanquish the Horde. A card that's usually sees play as well sometimes is Destroy Evil. That allows you to have like another way to blow up temporary lockdowns, which is big in the matchup since it hits your Skrelves Hive, so it's just something to consider there. So the other version of the deck I wanted to show, this was from the Melbourne Championship, Regional Championship, Zen Takahashi, Magic Pro. playing the more stock-ish version. So this one here, you also have Jawbone Duelist, the Double Striker in here, as well as a couple copies of Annex Sentry as removal. Still have your Skrull's Hive, your Fading Hopes as bounce effects, Serum Snare, Charge of the Mites, it could be removal or just instant speed creatures, and then Bring the Ending. So kind of similar in that regard. Thran Portal Gamers, Aspirant's Ascent. Until the turn, target creature gets +1 and gains Toxic. So it's like a pump effect that gains flying and Toxic 1. Against like the Gix piles, I can see this being reasonable, just a way to kind of protect. It's also against like red-based damage. It usually could just push you outside of that amount of damage. Toxic also stacks, so if it's Toxic 1 and this gives Toxic 1, it deals 2 points Toxic. Counters, Doorkeeper Thrall again for enter the battlefield effects. Slaughter Singer as just a way to kind of go bigger on the attacks, Spell Pierces, Annex Sentry, and then charge the Mites again. So interesting with this version here, not really a way to blow up Temporary Lockdown. I do think having some copies of Get Lost could be reasonable. This card kind of stands out to me. I'm not 100% sure. So if you know in the comments the validity of this, I know Zen was tweeting a lot about the deck, enjoying playing it and having a lot of reps with it. So there's obviously a reason for it. I'm just not 100% sure on that one there. Then go to Temur Control, Temur Analyst, Temur Ramp, Temur Rage, whatever you want to call it. This one's 71% win rate. So the core of this deck is you're playing all these Cabaretti lines. Or not Cabaretti, Kamigawa lines. Cabaretti is one of them. They sack and then find a land. You use that in conjunction with Nissa to generate extra mana and to trigger its 2 lands per turn clause to get a creature into your hand. With Analyst, you can rebuy all the lands from your graveyard, kind of creating loops. And then from there, you're able to generate a whole bunch of mana. With that mana, you catch Virtue to generate even more. Virtue can buy back your creatures, which creates loops. World Soul's Rage to burn your opponent out. Doppelgang to copy a bunch of things. Shigeki can rebuy things. And then Memory Deluge helps you find key cards. Similar with Ill-Time Explosion as a sweeper that can also help you fill your graveyard, later get stuff back, and then just kind of control your opponent's aggressive starts. Pick your poison, artifact, enchantment, hate, or flyers. 3 steps ahead is a counter. Turn the earth against like Jace. You basically on your upkeep can, they try to mill you out. Your upkeep you would normally lose because you have no cards in your graveyard. While you turn the earth, flash back, puts cards into your graveyard, from your graveyard into your library, and try to get them that way there. Counter spells, sweepers against aggressive decks. This version is also playing some cards. So post board, they usually will bring in stuff like Rest in Peace or Graveyard Hate, stuff of that nature. So you can shift your plan. Thrun, just a hard to deal with creature. Bonnie Paul, it's just so basically ways that don't care about your graveyard and let you beat down just as like a kind of Simic Temur Ramp Stompy deck. We then go to Gruul Prowess. So this is kind of the Pioneer version at home. A lot of these cards actually overlap to the versions. And this is just an aggressively slanted Slickshot deck. So you have things like Slickshot Show Off, Cacophony Scamp, Kumano, Monastery Swiss Spear, Picnic Ruiner to double up, Pump Effects, Ancestral Anger, you know, the old giant growth gamers. With Scamp, it's really nice because you can just throw it at your opponent. You get Trample with Ancestral Anger or Monstrous Rage, protection effects with Snakeskin Veil in the main, Questing Druid for some card advantage as well. Your sideboard just gives you access to sweepers for like the Might tokens, Convoke, stuff like that. You have Barrages for the blue-white matchup, pick your poison for flyers, artifacts, enchantments. Play of Fire, just cheap removal, Strangle, cheap removal, some protection effects, Scorching Shot for big things, in case of the Crimson Pulse. The one card, I play this deck in Pioneer. I was playing around with Urbrass Forge as well in there. A lot of times with this deck, because you have such a density of cards that don't do anything if you don't have creatures, I found Forge effective just to consistently give you a creature every turn. At least the cards aren't completely dead in that respect. Azorius Control, so 67%. I know Gabriel Nassif, Elliot Dragon all had good weekends in various European championships this weekend with this deck. At the core, blue-white control, a lot of counter spells. You have No More Lies, 3 steps ahead, a lot of cheap interaction, temporary lockdown main. You win with like Wandering Emperor, Jace, even Tishana beats. You have a bunch of sweepers between Depopulate, Sunfall, Farewell, cheap land interaction with like Field of Ruin. You have Restless Anchorage as another win condition. Sideboard, you're seeing cards like Dust Animist see play now. So just cheap ways to, you could plot it early and then late game is just a 4/5 flyer for 0 mana. It gives you some lifelink as well. Counter spells, negate for Graveyard Hate, Chrome Host Seed Shark. Usually your opponent will board out a lot of their removal. You can kind of pivot. So this version's actually pretty balanced in the sense you can kind of switch your game plan to almost like blue-white mid. Knockdowns for aggressive decks, a lot of one-offs. Temporary lockdown for the aggressive decks. Good seals, flanker, good at exiling the graveyard for like the Analyst deck. The Tishanas are good as well against the Analyst deck. If they go to Aftermath Analyst, try to sack, you could Tishana it in response. This one's actually interesting. Playing Baloth with the only consideration for Liliana. You can't actually cast this card in the deck, but kind of cool that way there. C double, choose one. If one has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, you choose both, copy spell, and then create a token. So this is actually for like the Analyst matchup. You can copy their spell, which is kind of cool. Boonbringer for aggressive decks, Elshinore for ETB, like the ramp decks, the domain decks, all their stuff's like ETB, so you get them that way. Hullbreaker for the mirror. Boros Convoke, so 66%. So again, just a very aggressive deck. This deck's pretty much close to identical to the Pioneer version. Core of it, you get these cheap creatures that make tokens that are artifacts. Novice Inspector, Volderic Epicure, even the Yodian is an artifact. You Gleeful Demolition them. You can tap tokens with Warden to get value. Case of the Gateway Express's removal and an Anthem. Your War Leader's Call pings at your opponent. You have Anthem effects in Sanguine Evangelist, and casting the turn of Imidane's Recruiter. Knight Errant of Eos can convoke as early as like turn 2, get you some more card advantage mixed to it. The access to Inspiring Vantage really helps the deck itself. Sideboard, you have End the Festivities, a Sweeper, Lithomantic Barrage, Destroy Evil for like temporary lockdown, stuff like that. Invasion of Gobokan as like Hand Hate. Rest in Peace as Graveyard Hate. Thalia for control matchups. Knockout Blow for the mono red kind of style decks. And then Wedding Announcement in here for the Grandier matchups, like the Golgari matchups. You'll also sometimes see things like Urbrass Forge in the sideboard, which I like in the heavy removal matchups. Then go to Dimir Midrange, 63%. So like these Dimir Midrange will eventually get to Golgari Midrange. There's a lot of different ways to build them. You can kind of configure it to your own liking. So this is an example. Again, you could take ideas, kind of shift around the numbers. Like this version, you're seeing a lot of these decks now play some number of Hostile Investigators, typically more than Shieldred, just since it has an effect when it comes into play. Forcing discard provides a card advantage. These numbers can vary. You can play some Shieldred in there too. The core of the Dimir deck is just a lot of cheap disruption, cut downs, duresses, Deep Cavern Bats as Hand Hate, Go for the Throat, stuff of that nature. With Gix to provide some card advantage. You have Preachers in here for card advantage, Trespasser Eat the Graveyard, Liliana for Hand Hate. This version's actually on 3 Vadmirs. I think I would rather play 2 and then play the full set of Deep Cavern Bats. Just as a nice disruptive element, but you're just trying to like eat away at your opponent's hand, take their cards, and then just beat in with like little shitters. Myrix in the mana base, as well as Restless Reef once you kind of exchange a bunch of resources. Sideboard's just more removal, Hand Hate, Sweepers, Graveyard Hate. You have like Glistening Deluge for the Convoke matchups, Hidebinders, more Hostile Investigators for Hand Hate, Sweepers, and then Back Gods for the more aggressive matchup or the grindier matchups. From there we go 5-color Domain. So this is just the Atraxa ramp deck. There's kind of 2 versions. There's the ones that is playing the 3-mana artifact from Big Score with like Lightning Helix. That tends to be better against aggro, worse against control. So it's kind of just seeing where you want to be at. This is the version from the PT with Cartographer's Survey as a way to kind of fetch some lands. Spelunking gets your lands into play untapped, but you're basically just kind of ramping ahead here and then winning through like Archangel Wrath, Atraxa, or Hard Migration. Cavern Naming Angels, your go-to line. Cheap removal, cheap removal, negates for counters, Rest in Peace for Graveyard Hate. Again, similarly, you can shift your removal package to have Chrome Host Seed Shark to kind of go wide if your opponent's playing bigger mana counters. Temporary lockdown for the aggressive decks. Tranquil Throwback, just a flexible card eating at graveyards, artifacts, enchantments. And then Nissa as a kind of big over-the-top play. You then go to Golgari Midrange, 60 or 61%. Again, various ways to kind of build this. I think this is the Reduke version, full Caustic Bronco, just a card advantage engine. Pairing that with Mosswood Dread Knight for card advantage. You have the Hostile Investigators here as a way to eat at your opponent's hand. Blissa, really tough to deal with in combat, provides some card advantage. Six Command, you have Harvester of Misery as some cheap removal in there. Liliana's Graveyard Trespassers, utility lands, and things like Restless Cottage in there. Again, just various hand hates, removal options, Path to Peril for the aggressive matchups, as well as Deadly Cover-Up. Interesting to see things like Get Rug just as a sideboard option, I guess just as a hasty threat to kind of punish like control, stuff of that nature, but Liliana usually is the key card in the control matchup. Rollback's good against like the domain matchups. You may want things like Terra Sunder in there. Is another flexible card in that respect. We have Esper Midrange, another deck that can be built a number of different ways. This is the Wedding Announcement version, so just trying to make a bunch of tokens. Wedding Announcement, Virtue, you kind of go wide. Raffine makes you go tall, so it's kind of a nice balance there. Gix with a bunch of cheap flyers, provides some card advantage. Tishana for activated abilities, a bunch of cheap removal, and some interaction mixed into there as well. Your sideboard is just various removal options, counters, pest control versus like the domain matchups or hyper aggressive decks, graveyard hate with rest in peace, and then just kind of tailoring your top end package as appropriate. We got a couple other decks. So you'll see various versions of 4 to 5 color legends. This one's from Sonal, but there's a number of different takes on the deck itself. The core of the deck is basically leveraging Slogurk, Rona, kind of Inti package with Relic of Legends. There's an infinite combo here, some assembly required. But basically, you have like Rona out with Relic of Legends. You can kind of loop the Retsteins by legend ruling them and getting them back to hand. And then with Vile Smasher out, you can ping your opponent infinite times from the enter the battlefield effect. There's also more convoluted lines with like channeling the lands with Slogurk, getting it back to hand, recasting it. You can effectively bounce every permanent from your opponent's side of the board. When you channel any of the lands with Inti out, it does trigger Inti's ability. So there's a lot of like game actions and decision points. It's a very convoluted deck, so get some reps in. It's hard to play. It's rewarding when you go off, but it is definitely not the play one drop, click attack type deck. Sideboard's just various removal options, hand hate, sweepers. You have things like Hostile Investigator in here. You can also play Back God that's been seen, Jace for like the domain kind of control matchups, Bonnie Paul for when they have graveyard hate. Then there's 2 versions of Mono Red I want to share. So this is from Tatsuaki Yajima. Apologies on that if I likely messed it up. This was a Japanese tournament. There was about just under 300 people. So this is a mono red midrange deck that won the event. They went... MTG Mail has been messed up, but they went like almost perfect through the event. Like 11-1, they finished first. The other list we'll look at is they finished 6th. But kind of an interesting take with full Urbrass Forge in the main board. Love this card main. I think it punishes a lot of these mid-range decks that aren't equipped for it. This version's packing a lot more removal in the main. Obliterating Bolt, Scorching Shot. So 6 pieces of removal that do not go face, as well as the 2 Witch Stalkers. You have 3 Lightning Strike, 3 Play with Fire, then 2 Feldings, 1 Godric, Charming Scoundrel, Bloodthirsty, and Swift Sphere. So no Slick Shot in this version, a little bit more aggressive. You also have Myrex Mishra Foundry package here. Cemetery Gatekeeper, eating away at the graveyard, kind of cool versus like the Temur Analyst deck. You can exile a land, which is useful, but then whenever they play a land, they take 2 damage, so it can kind of offset some of the life that they gain. Koth for the Grindier matchups, Sweeper and End the Festivities, Barrage, Graveyard Hate. You kind of just shift up. You could become more of a mid-range deck against things like Toxic and stuff like that, which is kind of cool. You shift your plan from being more aggressive to more kind of controlling. And then more like the stock aggressive version. Again, with Forge main, we're seeing more copies of this just for the mid-range kind of matchups. This version here, full Scorching shot in the main, 2 Godric's. So kind of similar in that capacity, but a little bit different configuration. And then similarly, just this version here could shift up a little bit more mid-range focus using Geological Appraiser to kind of cascade in. But you see the Cemetery Gatekeepers in here and the Festivities, a lot of the same kind of. So that is it. That is a lot of words. As always, if you do well, drop a deck list. Let folks know how you're doing. And good luck to all the competitors. Thanks for watching.